What's up? Welcome back to Nostalgia. Dave here with the review of Highest to Lowest, the new film from Spike Lee. His first film in 5 years since Da 5 Bloods came out on Netflix in the middle of the pandemic in 2020. Highest to Lowest, of course, is a remake of Akira Kurosawa's classic from 1963, High and Low, substituting out Toshiro Mifune, adding in Denzel Washington, taking Kurosawa's post-war meditation and replacing it with a modern-day story set in New York City. Of course, the world of Kurosawa adaptation and homage is very storied, and frankly, this is the second time that Spike has directly adapted a Asian film classic. Of course, let's not forget that he did his attempt at Park Chan-wook's Old Boy, about 10 years ago, which didn't go super well. That being said, Highest to Lowest is here after premiering at Cannes, and this is an A24 film in association with Apple. Unfortunately, it's not getting a full theatrical release the way, say, F1, the movie, did. This is just going to be in select theaters for a few weeks, and then will be available on Apple TV Plus on September 5th, which is where I imagine most people will end up watching the movie. And I guess that's a bit disappointing. I think this is a film that has certainly some crowd-pleasing moments, and I think Denzel's popularity could have propelled this movie to a decent box office, all things considered, but alas, that's not really going to come out, and frankly, A24 might not even tell us how the box office did. Highest to Lowest is a largely successful adaptation of Akira Kurosawa's classic. Adapting Kurosawa is no small task, and of course, a direct adaptation is going to invite a lot of comparison. There's a lot of things that Highest to Lowest doesn't really match up against its predecessor. That being said, Denzel Washington's central performance is very, very strong. One of his most charismatic central performances in a very long time. And there's just enough comment on, modern society throughout this movie to make it pretty compelling. A lot of the sequences that are replicated in this movie I find a bit inferior, but when Highest to Lowest changes things and we get something new, like a sequence in a music studio at the end of the film, that's where this movie really sings and the creativity really shines. Overall, though, I think it's still really entertaining. An essential premise of High and Low is still very applicable to a modern day story. So overall, I really enjoyed the movie. It's tough to do the comparisons, and part of it's not fair, but also part of it is inevitable. You think about High and Low, that is the second to last movie Toshiro Mifune made with Akira Kurosawa, his 15th of 16 collaborations. So that's a film that honestly has such a meta context to it. The central character Mifune plays, Gando, a lot of the things his character is musing about and his, building his legacy, or having built his legacy, and reflecting on what he's done and what kind of person he is. And the way that movie ends with a kind of nebulous, not satisfactory conclusion for its characters. There's no resolution to the end of High and Low, right? A lot of that's super meta and applicable to Mifune and Kurosawa's thoughts on their career and what they've done after making all these samurai movies. And in this case, I don't think this movie's trying to do nearly the same. Of course, Denzel has a storied history with Spike Lee. That's obvious. However, there is something to be said for, I think, there's a switch up they do, right? Rather than being a very successful shoe executive like Gando was, in this case, you have Denzel's character, David King, aka King David, as the New York press proclaimed him. And he's basically like a substitute for a Dame Dash or Dr. Dre at Aftermath, a really successful music label figure, hip-hop label figure, who made his legend, won his Grammys largely in the 2000s, the pre-streaming age, and is now trying to grapple with maintaining his relevance and maintaining his control on art and his finger on the pulse as the music discovery ecosystem has changed, grappling with his advancing age, what he wants his legacy to be. I think it's a really smart way to redo this premise in modern times, and Denzel as a label exec is a lot of fun. I think when you do get brief moments of that, it's enjoyable. I could have used more, frankly, right? There's nods to AI in music, and there's nods to trying to listen through all the noise with social media and the attention economy we have today, and how all that works. And a change they do with this story is King David's son is aged up. He's like a senior in high school versus the kids in high and low are like elementary school age and thus don't really have much to their character. But King's son, has his own thoughts and has his own more of a relationship, with his father. And I think that comes across maybe in a bit of a heavy-handed way when there's some emotional friction between them. But overall, I think it's a nice change. I think the key change with this movie, probably the biggest change of them all, frankly, besides obvious like modernizing of the story, but the big change here is that like structurally, the second half or the last third of Highest to Lowest is not like High and Low in the sense that High and Low becomes a bit of a police procedural, right? And Miyafune is almost like to the side and out of frame for a lot of the storytelling post the exchange of the money and whatnot. That's really just not the case at all. If you think back on High and Low, the police characters and lead detective have like a really big importance to the story, and they're real like a nice piece of the ensemble. And then they carry the story once it goes down that path. That's not really the case with the cops this time around. I mean, they're in the movie plenty, but Denzel as King is the central character the entire time still. And of course, more Denzel, always good. But I did really like how the cops were in the OG. And the other big change, in High and Low, Gando's chauffeur, whose of course son gets kidnapped by mistake, that character, Aoki, is like a subservient, worker on behalf of Gando. There's not really much of a rapport between them. He's just someone who works for him. Versus in Highest to Lowest, yes, it's still King's chauffeur, but he's played by Jeffrey Wright, big art, stature increase for the actor. And also the character has much more of like a years of history and friendly dynamic and like, found family between them. So his pain, his emotion, his desire to get his son back is a bit stronger, and there's more to that. That being said, I didn't think the decision, like the change, right, where King decides to pay the ransom after originally being steadfast and not wanting to do it, it came across as being a bit more abrupt in Highest to Lowest. He's kind of has the terse convo with his son. Then he's kind of in his office, getting a bit emotional, talking to the various black iconography he has on display: Aretha Franklin, James Brown, Jimi Hendrix, etc. And he just kind of comes to the conclusion that he's going to pay the ransom for his friend's kid. And I think they just pay that off a lot better in High and Low. It just takes more time to get there. Gando's grappling with what it means to pay that and sacrifice his livelihood and his plans for his career in the process. Like, I think all of that is just a bit stronger, a bit tighter in High and Low. And of course, in both movies, you get the exchange of the money. I think the original train sequence is still very memorable, still really works a lot. And it felt, it contributed to the lead up to that police procedural section of the film, because it really felt like the kidnapper had everyone dead to rights and had it all planned out, telling them what go into the bathroom window that you could actually open and sticking the money through the suitcase. And it was a thin suitcase that he asked for so it could fit through the window, and in between stops so they couldn't get off when they saw them on foot, right? I think that sequence really works. This time around, obviously, it's a change. It's now the subway going from like, Manhattan to the Bronx or Brooklyn to the Bronx, whatever it was. There's like I think there's kind of an abruptness to it. Like an e-brake is pulled, making King drop his backpack of money very conveniently into a moped guy underneath the tracks. Like, that felt really like Hail Mary to me, compared to like how like buttoned up and foolproof the plan was in the original. I just didn't like how like convenient it was, although it does lead to, I think, a nice little kind of moped like exchange where they get away successfully. I think a really amusing like 2-layer bit that's going on in Highest to Lowest. One of the cops is played by Dean Winters, who of course has a very successful career largely on television. However, recently, he's probably most famous for being the Allstate Mayhem Like Me narrator / character throughout all those commercials, right? So just seeing him be kind of a similar energy in Highest to Lowest as one of the cops, by the most antagonistic of the group, that was like, kind of like a fun note for the audience. But then later on, there's a great bit where when Jeffrey Wright calls up the hood to figure out where the kidnapper is once they, get some clues figured out. King is admonishing him, or surprised that Jeffrey Wright's packing some handguns. And when he gets asked what it is, he says, "This is insurance. This is Jake from State Farm," which got a huge laugh in the theater. And then they, I think a little later on, or is it in the exact same scene, Jake from State Farm handgun gets handed to Denzel, and then Jeffrey Wright's character pulls out another bigger gun, like a Magnum almost, and then King's like, "What is that?" And he's like, "This is mayhem." Really, like, unexpected insurance commercial humor in Highest to Lowest, but it got a great laugh, I gotta say. One note that I think it was just kind of unintended, like, piece of editing, but when watching Highest to Lowest, there's the realization that the kidnapper is in fact this aspiring rapper, young felon, played of course by A$AP Rocky in the movie. Jeffrey Wright, who is a guy who's out on parole. Paul is his name. Paul is out on parole, but still has connection to his past life. And he like texts someone like young felon's like Apple Music profile or something. And the scene, the frame is so quick. My theater reacted with like an "oh shit," like mind blown type reaction, because it was suggesting that like Paul was somehow in on the events, and like he was like a collaborator with young felon in arranged kidnapping. And of course that's not true at all. But like that was the reaction people had in my theater. And when I saw that, I was like, wait, this would be a really big change if like Aoki in High and Low actually was in cahoots with the kidnapper, right? It's a big change to how the story goes. That's not what happened, but the editing and the quick cut of it really suggested to my theater that that's what happened. If you saw the movie with anyone or just yourself, let me know if you had a similar experience with that, because that was 100% how it went when I saw it. But of course, that's not the case. A$AP Rocky, though, got to give it to him. On one hand, I'm incredibly frustrated that he continues to not release new music. How many delays have we had for this latest album, Don't Be Dumb? A dumb amount. Obviously, he's gotten through the other side of the A$AP Bari assault trial. I want this new album to come out. The last one came out in May 2018. That's a ridiculous wait. He's had multiple children with Rihanna. We're happy for him. These children are not newborns anymore because it's been that long that I could really use a new album. And it's frustrating to see him spending more of that time acting instead. Obviously we know he's very involved with fashion, seemingly increasingly becoming an actor. He has another movie coming out, A24, the Rose Byrne film, later this fall. He's also in that. I could really use that album from Rocky. And I think the original song that he did for Highest to Lowest, Back to the Front, I think it's called, that's actually pretty good. I think his verses are really fun on that. And I gotta admit, though, he's really pretty good in Highest to Lowest. Is it asking too much of him to play aspiring rapper? Of course not. But I think his charisma works really well. He's able to hold his own against Denzel in the few scenes they share. And as I mentioned in the beginning, that music studio scene where they almost like rap at each other in this like tit for tat, and like the screenplay like really like elevates for a second. Like it's a classic like Spike flair, that moment. And I thought it was really cool. And shout out Rocky for, I think, holding his own in the movie, and fit right in for the character. That being said, I did not love the actual ending of the movie. Like that would have been a good ending, right? But the actual ending, where they redo the High and Low ending, where Gondo goes to prison to see the dude, the kidnapper, and the kidnapper proves to just kind of be a sociopath, and there's no resolution or satisfaction in that conversation. And that basically kind of happens again, except it's just not as effective. You have young felon going incredibly viral as a result of the publicity of the events of the film. And then he offers to King to to sign him. Everyone else wants to sign him, but no, he wants to sign with King, and King isn't interested, right? And like, cool idea, cool premise to have that be like this possibility, I guess, for the movie to go. But I don't know, it just felt like a lesser version. And then on top of that, you get this like epilogue scene where King and his wife and his son are like listening to a live performance from this new artist who they might end up signing, and it's kind of like an Alicia Keys, kind of torch singer type singer in their house. And it's like, that also just felt super like unnecessary as like an actual ending of the movie. Like they had to like really button it up. I'm not sure like where that came from in the script, but didn't need that personally. So I didn't love how the film ended. I think there was a few moments where I was expecting the film to cut out and fade to black, like show us directed by Spike Lee or something. And I would have been like super satisfied with that as a cut point, but like it just kind of kept going and got a little long in the tooth. Much like High and Low, the wife character, nothing too much going on. I guess the wife this time around, played by Ilfench Hadera, who actually has some previous credits from Spike movies. I think she's fine. She has a little bit more to say as opposed to High and Low, but nothing too crazy. But yeah, overall, enjoyed the movie. I think it's a successful adaptation. I mean, this is leagues better than like how his Spike Lee's Old Boy went compared to Park Chan-wook's Old Boy, right? Like we're in a different ballpark. And yes, High and Low is a stone cold classic. Like it's a 5-star movie, like one of the most celebrated films in Kurosawa's filmography. Like Highs to Lows isn't going to be one of those for Spike, but still pretty good. And unfortunately, it was a 5-year wait between movies, right? He was pretty active the last handful of years, right? BlacKkKlansman was just 2 years before Da 5 Bloods. I love the Da 5 Bloods. Amazing Chadwick supporting performance, last one of our last gasps of Jonathan Majors before all that went to zero. So hopefully Spike keeps going. He's in his 60s now. He's not super young, but also, I mean, shit, Denzel, Gladiator 2 steals the movie last fall, right? Supporting role. Really great leading performance here again. Denzel still got it, unsurprisingly. But for someone who's slowed down a little bit, done a little bit more theater, less film, it's cool to see I think this 1-2 punch for his late career, the way it's gone. So really good overall. I'm so satisfied with it. Let me know what you think about it. What you think about it as an adaptation. How did you feel about the quick cut I mentioned? Did that confuse you the way it confused my audience? Let me know. And for more movie reviews, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.